Good morning and welcome to the Next Gen Planners Morning Commute. For the second time in history, today is not a bank holiday when it should be, so I'm a little bit disappointed. However, as I said last week, Monday is my favourite day of the week, so it's a 4-day week. Take it with a pinch of salt, and hopefully you'll be a bit happy. I'm Tom, and on today's show we have an interview with Ollie Smith of New Model Advisor, Titus Tomo with his frugal tip of the day, Alistair and Andre with another tech focus, which today is looking at two-factor authentication. That's well and truly above my pay grade. Hopefully they know a bit more than I do, obviously, about it. Today I'm joined by Gabby. Good morning, Gabby. How's your weekend been?
Good morning, Tom. My weekend's been really good, thank you. Standard lockdown stuff.
Yeah.
Exercise. I finished watching Normal People. I don't know if anyone's been watching that. But yeah, how's your weekend been?
Well, I walked in on my parents watching Normal People, and I've never been so shocked in my life. I don't know whether to be celebrating this or whether it's totally inappropriate for my parents to be watching it. And I don't know who was more awkward about it, my dad or me, personally.
Have you been watching it?
No, so I just walked in and
that makes it worse.
they were in the middle of something and I didn't really know what was going on. So
yeah, you need to watch it.
Well, obviously I'm missing out. What have we got on the show this morning following this then?
Next up, we have the news from New Model Advisor, and today is brought to us by Ollie Smith. Good morning, Ollie. What stories have you got on for us today?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Me again with Monday morning news. I'm surprised to hear that anyone could think that Monday is their favourite day of the week, but each to their own. I hope you all had good weekends. This just in from a press release, actually. Asset management and financial planning business Quilter has written to the Chancellor to ask him to extend the NHS's scheme pays annual allowance pension deadline. A lot of you will be familiar with the havoc wrought by the tapered annual allowance and the various fixes that the government has come up to try and ease pressure on the NHS, namely in the budget in March. But now in an open letter to Rishi Sunak, Quilter has asked the government to extend the 31st of July deadline so that NHS pension scheme members can make what Quilter calls retrospective NHS scheme pays elections within the same 4-year period available to those that are able to amend an existing election. Sounds complicated. If you want to hear more, check out our website. The move, they say, will give breathing space to NHS workers who have annual allowance charges to settle and are getting themselves into debt, potentially to pay them. At a time when the majority of NHS staff, they say, will have very little time to focus on their finances in any meaningful way. Next up, for anyone interested in how platforms are coping with the pandemic, I know we've discussed this on the commute before, have a quick analysis piece from my colleague James this morning on how platform Novia is coping. Novia has announced its full year 2019 results. Profits before tax have increased by more than 20% to 6.7 million in 2019 at the business, up from 5.36 million in 2018. But the platform has now warned of increased downward pressure on its AUM as the pandemic continues. Check out that story on the website too. And finally, we're all waiting with bated breath, aren't we, for the Thursday announcement of a plan to lift the UK's lockdown. But according to new documents obtained by the Financial Times from the Department for Business, Industry, Energy and Skills, measures being weighed by the government could see face-to-face meetings restricted in offices, as well as car and pen sharing banned altogether. Bizarrely specific rules there. I would have thought that would be obvious, but there we go. The government is also reportedly concerned about massive and sudden pressure on the UK's transport infrastructure as the country goes back to its workplaces. So office-based companies could be asked to restrict the number of staff who come in day to day. And just finally, it's worth mentioning that if you are a business owner yourself, you could be asked to file an additional risk assessment that displays how your firm is going to minimize risk as the lockdown eases. Firms with 5 staff or more do have to file risk assessments generally, but it looks like the government may introduce an additional risk assessment requirement as the lockdown ends. That's all from me, or is it? I don't think it is. See you shortly for something a little bit different.
Thank you very much, Ollie. Very interesting about the pens there, sharing the pens. Next, we have Titus Tomo with another money-saving tip of the day. Good morning, Tomo.
Morning, Gabby. Morning, everyone. I unlike Tom, Mondays aren't my thing. And to be honest with you, mornings aren't either, so I do soldier through. This weekend, I was just trying to remind myself some more of the tips that I've done over the past for the shameless plug financial wellbeing podcast. Go to any good podcast store and download it now. It's a terrific podcast, naturally, I would say that. And I looked back at one and I thought, you know what, bit of fun. I actually said once, my tip was to not put a pumpkin in the window at Halloween. And it worked. No one came. It was fabulous. I get to keep the sweets for myself. So yeah, that was my silly one. Serious one this week. I'm finding it very interesting because a lot of my tips have been orientated around experiences in the past and going and spending money on that sort of thing. And for me, food is quite important. And I thought, is it still appropriate to talk about that, considering we can't do any of it? But I thought, you know what? I'd like to think that we'd all be out there supporting the various restaurants that we frequented in the past, and pick up the same habits that we did when this is all over. And I remember a particular place that I thought was great, and it's very much on the environmental theme, cheap theme, and good food theme. So it is an app called Too Good To Go. And the premise of this is there are lots of restaurants up and down the country that have waste food towards the end of the day, which isn't a great thing because they've got to chuck it out because they can't sell it the next day. But you're able to actually buy that from them. So they will put specific meals on the app that you're able to buy because there's some food left over, buy it for a lot less, and then go and collect it. So I don't know if it's working through lockdown. My suspicion is not, but go and check it out. I think a great way to save money and save the environment all at once.
That's excellent. I really like that. My only problem, and I don't know if I speak alone on this one, is that I quite like eating early because I'm a hungry man, and I'm sure Steve might have a thought on it in terms of your fasting rules. It probably doesn't fit in with those if anyone's trying that.
I get that. I haven't used it much. I'm at the moment eating on toddler time, so I'm hungry again by about 8:30. But yeah, go and have a look. Like I said, with COVID-19 going on, I don't quite know whether it's working right now, but it was before, and it was,
perfect.
A useful tip, hopefully.
Thank you very much, Tomo. Next, we have our guest interview, which today is with magazine editor at New Model Advisor, Ollie Smith. Once again, hello.
Hello again. Hello.
It's like we've done this before almost.
Yeah.
Many in our audience will know a little about you from your work at New Model Advisor, but tell us how you first got into journalism and what you most enjoy about the job.
Yeah, great first question. I really feel for the people who are in our interviews who say that they sort of fell into financial planning and advice by accident, because that's very much my story too. So I studied history at university, and I derived very little confidence about the world of employment from that, other than the ability to write, roughly speaking. And I knew that, that was probably something that I should develop further if I'd spent, over £20,000 doing it in the first place. So my friends had all moved to London. I was living with my parents, regrettably, and I just thought, well, I've got to do something involving writing, and I've got to be near my friends. So I fired off 1 million applications for writing jobs. I applied for jobs in publishing, a food website. I almost ended up getting sent to Brazil to cover the renewable energy sector there. I got a job offer at the Telegraph, but that was days after I'd actually been offered a role at CityWire, and CityWire just seemed like the perfect place to go, because they they believe in kind of young, fresh people who don't really know what they're doing, and when they see kind of raw conscripts, they just they hire them as quickly as possible and train them up, and it was kind of the perfect outcome, really.
Perfect. So you are the magazine editor at New Model Advisor. What do you think that the role of the trade press should be within financial services, and what challenges do you think there are in fulfilling this role?
Well, there's obviously loads of economic challenges at the moment, because print publishing as we know it is in decline. But in terms of its role, I think staving off that decline is and creating change is one of the ways in which it can really survive. I mean, if I think back to a couple of the really big and important stories that we've done that perhaps didn't make the front page of any magazine, they perhaps didn't get huge kind of shout outs online or anything, but they're really important. They were stories that actually created change. So one of them was a story about the appointment of George Osborne to BlackRock, and if anyone reads Private Eye, they'll know that the ACOBA committee, which kind of vets ex-ministerial appointments to private sector roles, has something of a farcical reputation when it comes to identifying conflicts of interest. And ACOBA had said that there was no conflict of interest because none of George Osborne's work had affected BlackRock in any way while he was Chancellor, which of course is the biggest crock of shit you ever heard in your life. And Will Robbins, our illustrious editor, was quite sort of maddened by this oversight, and he got in touch with ACOBA and they changed the appointment details. I mean, granted, it didn't stop Osborne from being, from getting his one of many jobs, but it created change and clarity in the industry, and it showed the kind of power of journalists to kind of step in and say no to the man, and asking a kind of serious committee to kind of book their ideas up, really. So it's those kinds of stories I think that the financial trade press can really sell themselves with and stave off kind of terminal decline with where need be.
Fantastic. You'd never even think about it. You know that somebody's got to do it, but you never really have a thought into who does it in the background. So it's really interesting to hear about that. During the political, social and health turmoil of the last 3 years, the wider press and media has come in a lot of criticism from all sides. How would you summarise the performance of the British press in recent times?
So I thought about this a lot over the weekend, and if it's okay, I'll keep my comments to the newspapers, if that's okay, because I think there's a lot to be said about the way that the newspapers have covered and handled this. I think the first thing to say is that we do have a, roughly speaking, a kind of a centre-right leaning press, and notwithstanding a couple of very interesting and very good pieces of investigative journalism by the Sunday Times, for instance, about the government's missing out on the important days of planning and preparation for the pandemic, and indeed the panorama look at the NHS. I do think that there have been real moments of just kind of discombobulament, if I can use that word, where the kind of everyone's kind of been taken by surprise by this, right? And journalists and the people running newspapers are human too. I think there've been a couple of moments where they've been looking on in disbelief, and their sort of moral confusion about whether to criticise people that they have a vested interest in, when they're clearly not performing in the way that they should be, has kind of created a dearth of kind of accurate information and scrutiny. And if you look back to sort of the basic principles of what should make a good newspaper, what should make a healthy media sector, I think they've kind of been wanting there. The final thing I would say is the best example I can give of this is Matt Hancock. Now, there has been some stuff about the health secretary and his performance, but I've met Matt Hancock. So whatever you hear in the press about Matt Hancock as a health secretary, I personally don't have that much confidence in him. And I think that's really where the press could have done a little bit more here, is saying, okay, who's actually on top of their briefs? Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. This is about whether you have people in a position of authority and power who can understand a brief, understand a briefing, and communicate properly. And on that note, Dom Raab, I don't think is as good a communicator as perhaps we thought he was. And it's really the daily briefings that have displayed that. So I'm being sort of, critical, as is my role. But I would say that there have been several moments where we've really seen figures in key authoritative positions, lack lack the kind of lack the oomph really to grab the bull by the horns and really lead.
I think that was very evident. Obviously, when obviously Boris had a bit of time off and probably might continue to have a bit more time off actually. So we'll see where that one goes. At the moment, there's a lot of fake news in the world, as has been sort of published by Donald Trump himself, claiming all about it. What do you see as the dangers of fake news, and how should social media platforms be combating this?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I mean, if ever there was a time to learn that fake news can be deadly, it's now. You know, anyone who saw the Donald Trump spiel about bleach, you know, was no doubt alarmed by that. I think, broadly speaking, I really, really hope that in terms of the path of history and kind of cultural and mass psychological change, that this will, if it doesn't stop Trump's, you know, if it doesn't stop people's belief in Trump's kind of post-truth rhetoric, it will at least start to put the brakes on and give people a little bit of pause for thought about what they believe and what they don't. I think, without naming names, there are certain we see certain people in the financial planning community who give Trump, you know, the benefit of the doubt there, and I think hopefully all of this will, as I say, not necessarily bring that to a halt, because I think he's an incredibly powerful man and his prospects actually, for all the wrong reasons, look pretty good in America. But yeah, I have some hope there. I feel like if Titus Tomo, you know, if his sort of defining feature is saving money, minus all rampant cynicism and pessimism, but on this, I remain somewhat hopeful.
I think we need some optimism, and obviously I'd be worried if you said that you weren't about it. Turning back to financial services profession,
Sure.
Your magazine has recently featured a series of articles considering the future of the profession. How do you feel about the future of the profession from your perspective as a journalist?
As a journalist, I mean, I again, actually on this, I'm really hopeful. Because I think the profession has become so people orientated, and you know, speaking as someone who does a kind of weekly therapy session, there's so much overlap with the kinds of challenging and insightful questions that my therapist asks me, and the kinds of, and the impact that that has on my life and my ability to kind of self-understand and, you know, implement change in my own life, and the work that financial planners do to go beyond products and actually ask what people want to do with their lives, and more importantly, why. And I think that's important for two reasons. The first is that, you know, we have this ongoing focus from the regulator about suitability, and I think there are still, unfortunately, financial planners out there who think that suitability is solely a case of making sure that your client gets what they want. And I think that is a simplistic way of looking at suitability. And I think one of the ways in which financial planners add value, not just in an emotional way, you know, as I was describing, but also in real term economic value, is challenging people on their money decisions and their money hopes. You know, not in a brutal way, but just sort of offering that gentle prod to ask, you know, why is it that you want to extend the back of the house? You know, is there some sort of deep-seated insecurity that you have as a client that means that you're a little bit more competitive when it comes to these things in the neighborhood, for instance? The second reason it's important is because I think it shows that financial services is overall becoming a bit more human, and I think really the profession doesn't get enough credit there. I think where I'm slightly more confused and slightly, you know, slightly less able to make a conclusion about this is the business model. I think there's lots of really interesting discussions here that are going to happen and continue about business models and how people actually set up financial planning firms. Where the value add actually is going to be a really big part of, I would say, the next 5 years. Is it actually in the investment and the behavioral coaching side, or is it just the behavioral side? And I think you could see a real opening up of kind of money coaching and guidance services that actually don't make regulated recommendations. They simply add value to people's lives by kind of nudging them in the right direction. So we've been keeping an eye out for that a lot, and I suspect that there could be a lot more of that. I think, final cynical point, the regulator will need to adapt to that. You know, I think wherever there is change, there are always people looking to take advantage of it in a negative way. So it itself is going to have to be nimble, just like you guys have been.
Perfect. I've got one more sort of question for you, if I may. It's a bit of a short one, but obviously quite an interesting one as we've got you. Have you got any tips on writing a press release? And obviously, what are journalists looking for in a good press release? That's just a quick one. Sorry, it's not on the
No,
script, so
absolutely
no
fine. I
pressure
mean,
on that
I've
one.
got loads of opinions on this. I mean, I have to say there's nothing more infuriating in the middle of, this is a very selfish point, there's nothing more infuriating than in the middle of a really busy press day when you just want a story out, to be working from a press release and multiple other sites to try and piece together a picture, and the press release is just badly written. I mean, this is really is a case of keeping it simple and getting the basics right, and that that unfortunately for some people is something that they get wrong, and it's about spelling and grammar above anything else. It's about whether you could spell your words properly and kind of write a coherent sentence. So on the basics, keep it simple. Short sentences are just as fine as longer ones. Don't try and overcomplicate it. You start the press release with some kind of suggestion, perhaps for the editor or the journalist, about what you think the angle here is. Most journalists are looking to write a story about someone doing or saying something. So if you look in any headline, they want to see some kind of action. And when they get a press release, they will normally orientate the story towards something happening. So a good example would be this kind of the story that we've written up this morning from the FT is about the government weighing lots of different types of measure to get the UK out of lockdown and into a more sort of normal working arrangement, but there needs to be some sort of pragmatic kind of health stuff in there to make sure that we don't get a second spike. I mean, the story that you could have headed your press release, government minister leaks documents, internal documents to FT journalist. That could have been a story, but the government actually weighing up the merits of certain ideas was more the angle we were looking for there. So overall, I'd say keep it simple. Don't try and impress. I mean, it doesn't affect the outcome of the media coverage, I would say, too much, but it can be irritating to see people being sort of self-promotional by adding 3 clauses in the middle of a sentence about things that they did 4 years ago that were brilliant. Chances are, if that's happened, we would have already known about it, so don't bother.
Fantastic, thank you for that one. And
No
our
worries.
final question for you is, what are you most looking forward to do when lockdown is lifted?
I have to say, I'm a bit scared. I'm a bit scared by the lifting of lockdown, because I think I've got my routine, and I'm exercising every day. I'm eating 3 meals, which for me is a miracle. Not all at once. So I'm a little bit circumspect about it. I'm a bit scared that the positive routines are going to slip, and I know that I'm going to have to work really hard to motivate myself to sort of stay in that positive headspace and do all the good things well continuously. But overall, I think I'm most looking forward to just seeing my colleagues and just sitting in the pub and asking how they are. I think it's actually going to be really difficult for some people, and this is around the world, to go back to work in an office. Because I think actually in this situation, there are a lot of introverts in the workplace who they don't get a look in because they're quite quiet. They don't tend to get noticed, and they probably get less coaching and managerial input because they're a little bit quieter and inward looking than other people, which is kind of unfair. And in this situation, they've kind of thrived actually, because they've had that moment to kind of be by themselves and to really focus. And so it's kind of suited their personality traits. And I know a lot of introverts who've said that. I think people might struggle actually being face to face again and potentially having the difficult conversations that anyone has to have in a business sometimes about performance. But for now, I'm really, really looking forward to actually being able to walk over to the other side of the office and, just ask someone how they're getting on with the project that I've asked them to work on. And if that doesn't show how important it is to have simple, nice things in life as opposed to all the kind of flashy, materialistic stuff, then I really don't know what does.
Fantastic. Thank you for your time today, Ollie. It's been really insightful, so thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Gabby, what do we have next? Sorry for overrunning. Blame me. It's all my fault.
Thank you, Tom. Next up, we have Tech Focus with Alistair Walker and Andre Costa. Alistair, what do you have for us today?
Well, I've totally forgotten because I was glued to the screen listening to Ollie talk. We paid for the whole seats, but only had to use the edge of them. No, that was fascinating. We've now got 4 minutes to talk two-factor authentication, Andre. And as we were saying before the start of the show, you know, people like me and Andre talk about two-factor authentication for hours, days, even, given the chance. So we'll try and keep this brief. I made a big point last week of congratulating IntelliFlow only being about 5 years late for implementing this. If any of you are using Intelligent Office, you'll have had a prompt saying, please set up two-factor authentication. It gave really no explanation about what it is or what it aims to do, which is a slight oversight there, I think. But it is so vitally important that you consider it, not just on Intelligent Office, but on any piece of online account that you don't want somebody else to get access to. The key thing to think about is that almost everything we use online has a password, and a password is something you know. And something you know is very useful, and if only you know it, it's pretty secure. The challenge is, particularly if you only use one password for everything, or slight variations of the same password, someone else may well know that. If you're interested to know whether someone else may well know that, go to www.haveibeenpwned.com. I'm going to put it in the, and put in your email address. There you go, put it in the chat. Put in your email address there, see if your account has been leaked. If it has, your passwords aren't secure anymore. So, something you know. The point of two-factor authentication is it's something you own. So someone may have the something you know over here, but if they don't have the something you own over here, they ain't getting in. It is pretty much a guaranteed, nearly guaranteed way of stopping people who aren't you getting into things that are yours. So I'm not sure how I'm going to segue into talking to you about that, Andre, but what's your view on
that? It's actually it's what you just explained. That's it. If you have something that you own, no one else owns, it will be harder to actually get in on that system. I don't know what IO implemented, if it's via SMS or like a second code sent to the email address or something else. But there's been also some problems with the SMS two-factor authentication, because there's this thing called SIM card spoofing, which is kind of a social engineering way of getting access to your SIM card. So basically getting access to your own SMSs. So in some cases, if you use an SMS to get the second code to then get in the system, you might rethink that. If they offer another possibility, another solution, then it would be a bit more safe. I know that SMS is actually quite easy to use. If you change phones, there's nothing else to do. Your two-factor authentication will keep on working. But the added security of having like an authenticator like Google Authenticator is immensely, like, you can really update your security just by doing that.
That's a really good point. I'm going to talk really briefly about the practicalities. So let's say you're an Intelligent Office user, or you're managing a business of Intelligent Office users, and you're going, right, okay, we need to use two-factor authentication. What does that actually mean? They talk about Google Authenticator, which you mentioned there, Andre, which is a little app you can download on Android or iOS. You scan a QR code on the screen, and you get 6 digits that just keep on refreshing every 30 seconds. Those 6 digits, you type in after your password, they'll let you in. That's great. As Andre mentions, you lose your phone, you're buggered. You need to have backup codes, which they provide for you, but then you need to remember where they are, and that's often a problem. There's a nice middle ground that I really like. It's called Authy. So this is my Authy app at the moment. You can see I've got loads and loads of different accounts on here that are all just waiting to be used. Authy, the key here is you give up a little tiny bit of security and you get a lot more convenience, because you can sync your two-factor authentication codes between phones, You can add it to your desktop. You can have it as a Chrome extension. As Andre mentioned, the big risk with two-factor authentication is you use something like text and someone nabs your phone or clones your SIM card or whatever else. Authy, you do use your phone to authenticate with Authy, but you get a prompt on every other device saying someone's trying to set up as you. So you do have a little bit of backup. Oliver wants to log into my Bitcoin account. Hold on one second, Oliver. Do you want the password as well? But yeah, the point is, two-factor authentication is on top of using something like a password manager, which if you're not doing in 2020, I'm going to put you in detention. So password manager, two-factor authentication. If you've listened to the last 6 minutes now and you're going, what? Talk to me on the technology channel in Slack. I'll run you through it. It is so important. It will be the best bit of security improvement you could do for your business this year.
Definitely.
So hopefully that was we're just about within time. So back to you, Tom and Gabby.
Thank you, Alistair and Andrew. I think I needed that because I keep pressing skip every time it comes up with a two-factor authentication on IntelliFlow. I'm like, oh, let's skip, but no, you put me straight in detention. Anyway, Tom, what do we have on tomorrow's show?
The thought of Alistair putting me in detention is not something I was expecting on a Monday morning. It's enlightened my morning, I must say that one. And I promise next Monday I'll explain my love for Mondays for everyone. Tomorrow we have an interview with Faith Liversedge, I'm hoping, storyteller and marketing expert. We have Chris Budd's financial wellbeing thought for the day. And it's a Tuesday, so we have Catherine Morgan's coaching focus.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you for joining us, everyone. Have a great day. Stay safe. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.